Hey, welcome to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast and to another unpeddling conversation that Chris and I are going to host together tonight. Chris, I'm going to give you the honor of introducing and welcoming our guest tonight, since you know him better than I do and in different ways.
Yes, that's very true. Well, Matt and I really got to know each other very well when he was doing his stint in the UK for a number of years. The way I would describe Matt is probably one of the most hardworking people I've ever met, sometimes to his detriment probably in some cases, and his sleep patterns. But Matt is somebody who I've always really been very astonished at how he can just continue the pace he does and do it in such a great way. So over the years, it's been fantastic to become really good friends with Matt, as well as be able to work with him. And even though we don't work together today, we still connect often. And so I think I'm really excited for the conversation we are going to have with Matt today. Because, as I grew up with Matt a little bit in my initial kind of beginnings of my career. And so just seeing how Matt really has, begun to, go along this sales journey of what it looks like to, discover customers' benefits and sell to them in really different ways has been awesome to continue to hear about and connect about. So Matt and I have worked together, drank lots of scotch together. We've climbed a mountain together. We've driven to Oban together in Scotland. And so there's been lots of things we've done over the years. So I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Awesome. And I'm going to chip into that. So first of all, Matt, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. So I'm going to chip on the back of that. So, Chris is describing an experience that he had with Matt at this company that Chris used to work with. It's called Bartell. And I had the opportunity of becoming a consultant and working with Chris there and working with Matt. And when I first connected with Matt, Matt was in the UK and then moved back to Canada. At that point, one of the projects I was working on was bringing leadership to the Canadian division and some new things that they were working on. And I worked hand in hand, Matt, with you. I think it was hand in hand. I don't think we ever... nothing else.
Mostly hand in hand.
Mostly hand in hand. And Matt was, in effect, even though I was an outside consultant, not employee, I reported to Matt. And I want to say, for those of you who don't know Matt is a quality person, but a great leader as well. He's not just a great person, he's a great leader. I've watched Matt change and develop. We had the chance of instituting, a process of sales meetings and gathering the team and initiating a bunch of different things together. And those were great days for me, Matt. And so, you know what? That makes me alive. I'm a lot older than both of you gentlemen on this podcast tonight. But I tell you something. In some ways, you're like sons to me. But in other ways, you're like mentors. I've learned a lot from both of you in this journey. So, Matt, again, thanks for joining us in this journey that we're calling Unpeddling, which is all going to be a series of podcasts about sales and marketing and brailing into those worlds and really understanding what's going on, because this is a passion we all have. So here's, Matt, how I want to kick off the conversation. When we were prepping for this, you and I were dialoguing over email, and you said something in one of your emails that really caught my attention, and this is where I want to start our conversation. So I'm going to read the line in your email because it was really a powerful statement. And this is what you said: "I don't think I've ever been successful at getting a customer to engage because it matters to me. That's not how it works." That's what you said. So, Matt, you are a vice president of sales and marketing at your company. What do you mean when you say that?
Thanks, guys, for the kind words and introduction. Certainly have learned tons from you guys and appreciate you guys having me on. Yeah, I don't think in the sales world we build these processes and we build these game plans and we build these strategies that largely revolve around us achieving our business objectives. And as as I progress on my journey, I realize that in a very similar way that we have our business objectives, every other business that are our customers or our prospects have their strategies, their initiatives, their business objectives that they're trying to get after. And so in short, what I was kind of saying in that meeting is I don't think I have been successful in growing or engaging in business with somebody because it was on my checklist of things to do. And another just kind of digging into what matters to them and what matters to their business has kind of always got to be the place where it starts.
And it's a great point, Matt. And I think we all are in an evolution, in relationship to these things. We're in an evolution of understanding what's important to us and what's important to our customer. And I think as a point of context, I should help the listeners understand that. So who do you sell to, Matt? Like, who are your customers? Are you selling to consumers? Are you selling to end users of your product, or are you selling through a distribution channel? Because obviously, it doesn't totally change the dynamic, but it influences the dynamic, I guess, of what's important to that customer, depending on the customer.
For sure. So we're a manufacturer in the construction industry, and we do B2B sales. We sell through distribution and through rental networks. And so, I think that does change it a little bit for sure, Tim, because we are talking to businesses who have the plan of making money, and at the end of the day, you got to appeal to that. And it's funny because I've had this conversation with lots of people about really trying to figure out what matters to the customer, and sometimes it's misunderstood. And what I don't mean by that is, compromising your sales process, compromising, who you are as a person or a salesperson to meet what matters to somebody else, or compromising your integrity, or, any of those things. That's what I don't mean by, it's not just being a pushover or groveling to meet somebody else where they're at. But I think the question to ask is, and really to answer the question, you need to know what matters to the customer, which is key. So to know that it doesn't matter would assume that you've done enough work and asked enough questions to find out what does matter to your customer. And that means that's maybe not the corporate entity, the customer. That might be the individual you're dealing with on a personal or professional basis. To really find out what matters to that individual or that business unit, or
well, if I could, I'll just chip in there as well. I think what you were saying there, Matt, too, like from my perspective, like the whole thing about like discovering what matters to the customer, I think, as you said, like, it's not about compromising who you are to become what they need. It's about understanding if there's natural alignment that happens. And I think that, like, as you alluded to that, it's so right. Like, we don't just go and, discover what a customer or prospect needs so that we can become that for them. We're doing it. And I, because we've sold together, I know that we do this to see if there's alignment there. And so I think that too is an important thing. It's like this is about gaining alignment, not about becoming something you're not. And I think that's an important aspect that you talked about there for sure.
Yeah.
So Matt, let me ask you a question. So you made an interesting distinction, which I think is important to understand for those of you who sell for a living and engage with customers. Matt, you made a subtle nuance, and that is what the company that you're selling to. And I guess we really don't sell to companies when you think about it. The company doesn't really buy anything. I think it's a person. So what the company's objectives are, or desire, or what's in it for the company may be exactly what's in it for the person we're engaging with, or they could be sort of or fundamentally different. So when if I understand you correctly, when you're thinking about it that way, how do you figure that out? Because that seems like a bit of a sticky wicket that you can get stuck on.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, nailed it. It's a bit cliche, but people buy from people. And if you agree with that sentiment, then there is a person or multiple people within an organization that you interact with and deal with, and really finding out what matters to them on a personal and professional page is really important. And I would say one of the a common mistake or a common conversation I find myself in is that as salespeople, we sometimes treat everybody else like a salesperson. Meanwhile, people have their whole role and job description and possibly compensation structure, or possibly metrics that they measure, reward them and incentivize them for totally different things that are quite foreign to sales, like saving money or coming up with innovation or coming up with efficiencies. And so understanding not only on a personal level the people that you're selling to, but on a professional level, how are these people, how is the person you're dealing with measured, incentivized, is really important in order to have a win-win, which is ultimately what you want.
So, hey Matt, on that,
Yeah.
do you think that this is one thing that I was thinking about in preparing for our conversation tonight? Is do you think that customers actually have a good grasp of what they believe their key benefit or thing that they look for is? I've been asking myself that question more and more. I think sometimes there's a bit of a process of us needing to help people discover what those benefits actually are, than them being able to succinctly deliver that to us. But I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I didn't mention, and what I don't mean by it, is it doesn't mean that you won't find yourself in a situation where you need to convince somebody or sell on the benefit or the value of dealing with you as a person or a company or product or service support, whatever that is. It doesn't mean that that your customer may not have attributed value to something that you value, and there's education needed there. And I think you're completely right on that, Chris. I think some people have clear metrics and measurements, but even beyond that, I think to somebody who you have relationship with and can have that conversation with, I think there's opportunity to show somebody value or benefit that they didn't see before.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about, you use the word metrics, Matt, and as you talk about that, I'm thinking about something. I'm thinking, so, each of us is approaching this conversation from a different vantage point, which is really the exciting part of this new format for us in our Unpeddling series. In the other podcasts that I do, I either do them single, just myself talking about a topic, mainly because I like to hear myself talk. Or I do a conversation that I call Uncork that I do with someone else, and it's just myself and a guest. But this is a format where Chris and I are coming at this sales and marketing from our own experience, and it's different. And you're coming as our guest from a different experience, and which I really like about this, because as we come about it from a different experience, it's sort of, I often say to my customers, truth is like my hand. It looks different to me than you. When I look at it, I see a palm, but you guys don't. We need each other to see the whole truth of this thing. And so with that being said, when you say metrics, it makes me think, at times, in my career as selling, but maybe more importantly as training salespeople, we lose sight of, if we're not careful, the metrics, as you say, of how people are rewarded or how they see their job. And so we go in, our company says, hey, we need again, it's very selfish. Hey, we got a bunch of excess inventory and we need to unload it, which is effectively is the corporate mandate. And so we all go toddle off to the market and we say, okay, I got a deal for you, sir. If you take 6, we'll give it for you a price of 4. But if the guy you're selling to, his metric is reducing growing gross margin by reducing inventory, that's a hard pitch. Because in fact, we're asking him to do, or her to do, what is actually going to be punished and not rewarded or valued on their side of the business if we're not careful and we haven't asked some really great questions.
Yeah, that's the perfect example of why that matters. And when you say metrics, that's exactly what I mean. Something I've heard you, Tim, ask before when we've gone to meetings together, which alongside, not everybody is willing to tip their hand on what metrics I'm measured at or how I'm compensated, or a lot of these things that we're talking openly about can be pretty challenging conversations, or rely on a relationship to even begin answering those. One of the questions I've heard you ask people before, which starts into that conversation, it is simply just inquisitive questions about them and their career, and where they see themselves within their current structure, and where they see themselves going. And a lot of times, it's just a gold mine of information that comes out in terms of not only where they're at currently, but what they feel they might need to do or want to do to get to a place they need or want to get. And to me, it's those situations where, as a salesperson, you have a real opportunity to help somebody achieve their personal goals or their professional goals by hitting yours. And I think that's a real I think that's an uncommodifying conversation when you can have those things align, and they don't align all the time. No. I think it'd be unrealistic to pretend like that would be an every person, every customer conversation that could happen. I think it might be what we pursue as we hunt and sell.
What are your thoughts on that, Chris? Obviously, Chris, you're coming at this a little different vantage point in your history, and then now your current role in leading a team like Matt. You are a vice president. I think you probably have a similar title in a different organization, and so you're leading teams across North America. Matt a little bit into South America, I believe, as well, the Americas. But Chris, how do you see that? What does that look like for you, and as you think about what Matt said?
I think going back to what we were talking about before, I think that's where the whatever you call an initial meeting, a discovery meeting, probably would be the best way for a lot of people to frame it. I think that's where being able to understand and uncover people's metrics, I think doesn't. It changes how you pitch. It changes how you nuance what we're going and selling and actually talking about. And I think that's really where the power of understanding customer benefits and being able to be very skilled and nuanced and sell right into those benefits is so important. Because at the end of the day, as we alluded to before, we, as companies and people, we have values and our customers have values, and those really aren't going to change at the end of the day. I'm not going to change my business strategy because my customer has a slightly different one, and same goes for them. They're not going to change their whole business strategy to appease me. And I think that's where some of the understanding how they nuance benefits and they nuance what they want to see in a company, I think that's really where the skill of selling comes in, is being able to have such a good discovery meeting that you can nuance your pitch to, again, and this is where I think you can get into a little bit of, we're not saying lie to get into sell their benefit, but I think a lot of times we are able to nuance our pitches and make sure that we highlight a particular portion of what we do that really aligns with what they're looking for, to make a very powerful argument for why we should be working together and partnering more. And again, going back to, I think this also helps our customers and partners discover maybe how when they have to go pitch. Like, I've been working with a lot of large national retailers recently, and when you're talking to those people, the person you're talking to at the start, they are having to sell what you're selling them to their boss to get them to move. So if you don't give them good ammunition to go to their boss and give a good pitch, there's no way that you're going to be, have a good advantage over, an RFQ process where you're basically just submitting pricing at the end of the day, which is just, for any salesperson, that's our worst nightmare. Just send me your pricing in an Excel sheet. Like, that's the worst nightmare. So I think, how we discover customers' benefits and then nuance them into our sales pitch, I think is really the key here. And I would say, like, that's, to me, that's the qualities of a true sales professional, is being able to understand and uncover those benefits and then being able to tailor your pitch towards them.
Matt, what does that look like in your world and with your team? I mean, you're leading a team across multiple countries, in different scenarios. What does that look like as you engage with this discussion with your team? How do you guys approach this exact conversation?
With finesse. I think that's one of the dangers we can get in as sales managers sometimes, is the whole, here's the program and go and shoot. And it kind of goes against a lot of what we're saying about, okay, we might have our sales process where we believe we can unlock this, truth and value, what's important to our customers, and that's important to stick to. But the flexibility is so valuable in the conversation, because in our market, specifically right now in the industry, there are still companies that have older generations at the helm, and yet there's a lot of companies where the next generation, quite a younger generation, is now leading the company. And those conversations, even in and of themselves, are quite different in terms of what they value and how they do business and what they're open to talk about in terms of metrics, or even if they have metrics or recognize it as that. Some of the companies we come across, although I would probably argue they do have metrics, but they don't associate it like that. And so asking a question like, what are your metrics, is met with silence and odd looks, and this isn't going well. And so certainly in our market, there's a need to be able to know a certain amount about the customer before you even go in, and being able to kind of read that room and ask similar questions in a way different way to get the same result, which is, what is important to the customer, and does that align with us? Is that a good fit for a partnership? That's kind of what a lot of that conversation looks like for us.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because Matt, I mean, from your language, you're suggesting, and this is again challenges I think the average salesperson, is not everybody is a good customer. Not everybody is a good partner. Lots of people can buy your stuff, but not everybody is a great partner, and not everybody is the right partner. And I think that is a challenge for most salespeople, because there's a sense in which we want to sell lots of stuff to anybody, but if we're not careful, then we're not selling the right stuff to the right people for the right reasons, if you think of it that way. And I know from engaging with you, Matt, and the team across North America, I mean, there was a lot of, again, I'm approaching this a little bit more on the consulting side, because I'd have the privilege of working with you as a consultant, and I know, as we've talked about with your team across North America, there's a nuance to this, and understanding. Again, if we use a certain word like metrics, not everybody would understand. But if we ask a question, when I think about it like a question, if you're going if you're going into, and maybe if you're listening to this podcast and you're a sales manager or you're a sales professional, here's, I guess, my personal challenge to you is that if you're going in to sell something to somebody, chances are, unless you've invented a brand new product, you're either asking them to go in a new market where there's some risk and you need to understand that, or you're asking them to replace another vendor with your product. And if that's the case, to me, in the simplest form, beyond what are your metrics, the basic question I would always want to ask is if you were to switch vendors of this product, Mr. Customer, what would have to be true to you, and what would make this a great business decision? If you know the answer to that question, you know the answer, you know whether or not you can be a great partner. If what they say is, well, Tim, you would have to be less expensive and I'd have to be able to make more margin on selling your product if this is a distributor, and I know I can't do that, then I'm not a good partner. But if their answer is something I know I can do, then I know I have an alignment in what is ultimately good for me and sustainable, and ultimately good for them. And to me, again, that's the nuance in how we ask the question, right? And when we talk about it, and that's the art and craft of the process of understanding ultimately what a customer wants and needs and has to be true in the transaction or in the relationship or the partnership. Because if we can't satisfy that basic need that they have to justify, as Chris said, a lot of times we're not necessarily dealing with the person we're dealing with a person who will make a decision or be an influencer, but they'll have to justify that to somebody else. And if it's not a great business decision, we're not helping our customers at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I love that question. I learned that from you, and I used it today. I literally had a conversation today that said what would need to be true. And you can just find... what you find out is invaluable and realistic. It really is a realistic or a current state of where you're at in their mind in terms of what would need to be true to fill.
Well, and I
the
think
blank.
sometimes too, like as you said that, like there's some, and going back to what you said about finesse, Matt, around discovering benefits. I think also too there's a lot of finesse that needs to be taken when there's one thing where we have a process, or as we're having this conversation again, I'm even challenging myself, like we can't, and we often do, it's like we over process things, we make things too clear cut, we don't acknowledge the amount of finesse that's needed to do a process well in sales, because it's almost a continuum. It's not a process, like I don't know, process is probably a terrible word for anything in sales because it's so not the same every time, to be honest. And so like I think too there's some for me, I actually had an experience yesterday where I got a call out of the blue, and I don't normally get calls from customers out of the blue, and it was a guy saying, hey, we do $300,000 to $400,000 in this product with your competitor, and we want pricing. And like I was about to say, like, sounds good, let me get you set up with the right person, and I, like, for a second I stopped myself and I was like, whoa, like why is this guy calling? Like, this is way too easy. Like, what's going on here? And if I don't, this is the crucial impasse, where if you don't stop them and find out what's going on, then you, I don't know, it seems to evaporate. Like the opportunity just almost evaporates, and you got to work really hard to create it again. And so I just stopped for a second and I was like, hey, why? Why do you want to eat? Why do you want pricing from us? And again, then we did have it was short, but we had a good conversation where I discovered, well, one of our competitors, he likes them, but they don't really have a complete line of stuff that, they are looking for. It's like, well, there we go. That is, our territory manager. It's like, that is your nugget. When you pitch to him, I don't care what you pitch. I don't care what pricing you give him. I don't care what he asks for. You better be pitching that we have a complete line, because that's really why he's coming to talk to us. And again, going back to what you said about finesse, it takes a lot of finesse to, work out in different scenarios and different situations. How do we discover benefits, when we're being proactive and prospecting somebody who we've never met before, which I actually think is probably the easiest way to control the process because we're initiating it. But I think also, how do we react to get the benefit when it's just coming at us? And I think trade shows and oh my gosh, think of the epitome of trying to discover a benefit at a trade show with 400 people around. Do you know what I mean? I think that's where some of that again, great word, finesse. How do we be more finessed at discovering benefits in unique situations?
So Matt, when you think about this, and so I should remind our listeners at this point, so if you tune into the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast and you're expecting an interview, that's not what we do. If you want an interview, you should go listen to another podcast. We don't do interviews. We do conversation. And so it's a conversation that finds itself in the moment, and in this case it's a conversation between three people. It happens to be three people with history and friends and relationship and done business together and lots of stuff, but it's a conversation. So again, if you were looking for an interview with Matt Locke, you didn't tune into the right podcast. If you're looking for a conversation between three guys who are trying to figure it out, you're in the right place, because we're figuring it out. I'm figuring it out after being involved in sales and marketing for 30 plus years. I'm figuring it out. I've been doing this longer than Chris Windsor's been alive. I'm still figuring it out. And so that's the great part that I love about this format. So Matt, as we figure this out together, like when you're having this kind of conversation with your team, one of the questions I have for both of you, and I'm going to give it to both of you. So, one of the challenges I think is on the marketing side is marketing and sales interact. We task our marketing departments, and I know you guys do, with creating literature with benefits in it. The problem is those benefits are quite anemic in some sense, because they're the benefits really that we think people are interested in, the customer. But the challenge is many salespeople, if they're rather lazy, and I hate to say if you're listening, you're a sales professional, sometimes you're a little lazy. You take that piece from the marketing department and you think, I got all the benefits, and you slap it on, you give it to everybody. What if those benefits don't mean the same to everybody, and sometimes they mean nothing to nobody? So how do you guys engage with your team as you look at that and you get them to think about the real benefit to the customer beyond the marketing material? What does that look like, Matt, when you think about that, when you engage with your team? How do you challenge your team to get their game on in the relationship to this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim, because I think we all can fall certainly into that rhythm of, I'm going to a meeting, where's the thing in my hand, that brochure, that catalog, that whatever, because it has things that my customer is supposed to like about what I have to offer. But it doesn't know my customer, and we just all talked about how much change there is across our customers. So it's of course an unrealistic ask to have what my customer values in what's already printed, and so I think a conversation that happens a lot, and I wouldn't say that I would say it's almost a continual conversation, because when you sell iron like we do, it's easy to focus on the physical, the thing that we're selling, and so I think it's a constant conversation on our team, and reminding of each other in sales meetings and just one-on-one conversations and that kind of stuff, that we aren't product sellers. A lot of the conversation we have is that we sell the opportunity to have a business plan. Tim, it's not a new conversation for you and I, but we sell the spread between what they buy it for and what they sell it for, and the ease of the process in between. The fact that there's a hunk of metal that also goes out of our door and into their door and out of their door and into somebody else's hands is of course part of the product and part of the value for sure. But I'd say the continual conversation that our team has is making sure that we are relationship sellers that are building partnerships and selling the business opportunity to be in partnership together. Is kind of, I guess, one of the many continual conversations that's happening on our side.
It's a great nuance. So again, think about it. I mean, again, if you're listening, so if you're in what I hear you saying, Matt, and it's a good reminder, if you're in B2B selling, business to business, and you're selling through distribution channels, which both of you guys are, you're selling through distribution. You're not selling to end user. The reality is the end user is not possessing the product. They're not buying, in this case, Matt, they're not buying a grinder. They are buying the margin spread in the grinder and the performance of that grinder to the end user, so they don't have to uptake the problematic questions in its difficult usability. They're buying the removal of risk, the removal of problem, and as much margin spread as they can get. I hate to say it, but isn't that what they're buying at the end of the day?
Absolutely.
They literally are taking your metal and melting it down for cash. Literally. And Chris, you're in a similar situation in some ways, selling to distribution when you think about it.
And I think too, like, just to bring in the marketing perspective, because that's kind of where I started, is that I think that's where some marketing people get confused, because like the B2C marketers seem to understand this a lot better than the B2B marketers and salespeople. Like B2C, in those businesses, marketers are the drivers often of sales. You know, you don't have the sales associate at a Walmart or something like that isn't selling anything. It's the ads that are bringing you in. It's all that type of stuff. You know, the way that Apple, has understood how to sell what you're getting and what your life's going to be like after you get an iPhone, rather than selling you a piece of hardware. That's the genius of marketing, from a B2C standpoint. But when we get into the B2B context, I find and I've fallen into this trap, is you very easily, Matt, as you said, like it's so easy to get product specific, because it's like you're selling to technical people, generally speaking, or people who are at least, they understand the field that they're in. And, one of the biggest benefits I've had with coming to the company where I am now, which we sell products that are like literally commodities. Matt, when you and I worked together, it was like you could go out and see the product and talk about the engine, and as our one of our great friends who works there, you can sell the air scrubber that makes the air cleaner, when it comes out. But then when it came in, you actually see it, and it's tangible and it's cool. Whereas where I am now, I sell pipe. Like how much more boring, which this is where I love it, is this has been, for me, this has been a blessing in my salesmanship, to sell something that is so common you can only go somewhere other than the product. Like I can't sell you that our pipe is any better. It's great, but it's not any better than anybody else's, and it's probably the same price. So it very quickly does push you to figure out there needs to be a better way to do this, or I'm not getting anywhere with this. And so
just by the way, I hate to say this because the management at your company might be listening, Chris, but it might even be the same pipe
in some cases.
It may even be the same pipe. But see, this is what this podcast is all about, gentlemen. It's about uncommodifying. Because at the end of the day, do we really have something substantially, materially different than our competitor does, other than ourselves and the conversations we have and the stuff we do and how we differentiate ourselves and have a better conversation? Isn't that what we have at the end of the day, gentlemen?
Absolutely. Well,
absolutely.
And I think too, one of the things that I've started doing is intentional commoditization. Because when you're trying to sell something that everybody knows is a commodity, and you're selling it not as a commodity, you're like every other salesman who's pushing stuff, shit uphill. It is what it is. And so I've gone into places and been like, look, that our stuff is good, but it's the same as everybody else's. And I don't even want to talk about that today. I want to talk about why we want to work together. And all of a sudden you see people just oh, okay, this is a bit of a different conversation.
Absolutely. So Matt, let me ask you, if I was coming into your company and you were spending time with me as my sales leader, as my vice president of sales, and you're beginning to take me into this world, what's the most important things that you would want me to know about shifting from just this product selling to this idea of really understanding the true benefit to the customer and the customer that's in front of me in that moment? Again, we're all learning. And again, really be clear. If you're listening to this and you're looking for the three experts on sales, you got the wrong podcast. You need to find another one. We're not experts. We're figuring it out still. And if you're brave enough to admit that you're figuring out stuff still, then this place is for you. If not, and you got all the answers, you should have your own podcast, as far as I'm concerned.
And let us know what that is.
Let us know all the answers.
Let us know that podcast.
We want your answers. We want your answers. Yeah. So Matt, how would you bring me into this world? How do you help me start to awaken to this idea, that my benefits maybe aren't that important to the customer?
So I've had the privilege of working with a few new sales guys over the last couple years, even in these crazy times. And again, it's a bit of a nuanced conversation depending on their sales background. I think when we have this type of a conversation about we're not product sales guys, but we're selling something bigger, for somebody who has had that frustration before, I feel it's really natural, and it kind of hits close to home if you've had that experience. I think, you know, I mean, it often on our team, it often just starts by asking questions. So we do have a sales process that I would say embodies what we're talking about, and you guys both know it well. And we developed a sales process that was intended to be an internal sales process shared with our own sales team amongst the sales team, so that we could communicate at a higher level with each other. And one of the neat things that happened is it very quickly became a customer-facing process that the team embodied and turned and faced towards the customer in transparency that says, hey, this is how we'd like to do business, and what do you think about that? And so I've kind of been blessed in that sense that when we're either onboarding new people or just talking about it again, because I think we all need constant reminders. We have built a process that is a great reminder and helps us walk through that some of those conversations and remind us of these conversations, as it's easy to fall back. And it happens to be, as Chris said, I'm calling it a process. It is cyclical, and it's very much cyclical, what we've kind of laid out. And so I'd say that's kind of one of the ways that we bring people on board in probably a quicker way than just having conversation.
You know, as you talk about that, Matt, the thing that's really resonating for me is, and I guess at the end of the day, that my benefits or the benefits I perceive that I have or my process or my product has, really at the end of the day only matters if they matter to your customer. I mean, it doesn't really get that more simple than that, does it, gentlemen? Those benefits only matter if they matter to our customer. And so often, I'm not sure that salespeople really know if they matter. And that is the problem we're talking about. I think that's the critical problem. If you're listening today and you're in sales or marketing, that's the critical problem. Do you really know what matters to your customer? It's a great question. And let me ask you, Matt, your sales team is more than likely more sophisticated in lots of ways in this area because you've been having this conversation. But Matt, you've been around this game a long time, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, in the Americas. Do you think the average person really understands what matters to their customer? What do you think?
The average person, no.
No.
I don't think so. I don't know that I don't know that there would be many people that wouldn't agree that it's important to know. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of those things that I think there'd be very few people that if you ask them that question and ask them if it's important to know what matters to your customer, I think there'd be very few that would say that doesn't matter. I think most people would say, yes, that's important. But if you followed up and said, so tell me what matters to your customers, I think probably the average person would struggle to come up with a good answer.
Interesting. Chris, what do you think on that? I mean, you're in a similar position than Matt in the market. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree. And I think too the next level is even if a lot of people do, which I agree with Matt, I don't think a lot of people do understand what really matters to their customers, but I think even the people who don't use it to their their benefit. So they know it. They say, well, this matters to my customer. But then they just go, when they start pitching and talking, they just do what they've always done. And it's like, well, you knew it, you had it, but you didn't use it. And I think, Tim, we did some training a few weeks ago with my sales team. And it's like, these things are just, we're not talking about anything groundbreaking. It's nuance. It's how do we take what we learned and actually use it? It's like, these things are just so simple at their core. And I think this is what I love about having these conversations and getting different perspectives, being just, again, reminding ourselves that we actually already know what we need to do to be successful. We just need to actually do it. And I think that's where the power comes in with a lot of these things, is there's nothing really that special about the intelligence of understanding what our customers need. As you said, Matt, like, there would be very few people who would disagree with that, but it's what are people doing with it? I think that's the question I have, is where are the salespeople who are actually consistently understanding and tailoring their pitches and aligning with people properly based on benefits? I think that's the bigger question I have.
Yeah, no, it's true. So listen, we're going to start wrapping things up here, but it reminds me of a conversation today, different context, but I was doing some leadership coaching today with one of my clients, and we were talking about a goal that they have to really, they have a goal in 2021 to make their team's job easier. I said, well, that's a great goal. And so I asked the question of this leader, so how are you going to do that? And they started giving me all these answers. Well, I'm going to do this to make their job easier, and I'm going to do this and this. And I said, oh, cool. Have you asked them? He sort of said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, listen, I'm not that smart, man. So here's what I would do. If I was going to try to make my people's job easier, I would go and ask them what would make their job easier. And I'd probably go with their answers if it wasn't immoral or unaffordable. That was my advice to him. I think that's the same thing we're talking about now here, is that, again, we want to come up with this amazing, strategy. How do you find out what a customer wants? Is it as simple as ask them some really great questions and figure it out? Like, could it be that simple, gentlemen?
I think, yeah. I think it could be. I think asking the question is a great place to start, and relationship. You gotta earn some relationship to ask good questions.
Listen, yeah, I agree. You got to have relationship. I think there's ways to do it if you do it smart. And listen, I'm gonna tell a story, and then Chris, you put a comment in here, and then Matt will give you the last word here today. But I want to tell a story because I think it really pushes into this. I was on the road one time at a project where I went on the road with a group of salesmen across Canada, and I went on the road with them, and I observed their selling process and got involved in it. And this was back in the mid-2000s. And I remember I learned a valuable lesson because one of the customers, it was a B2B selling experience for a large multinational manufacturer. And this is all I want to say about that story. That customer bought, the procurement manager for this company bought so that they could save their job. That was the reason they bought. They didn't buy because any other reason. At the end of the day, I remember asking the question. I said, hey, if you were to make a great choice in the product you were going to put in this application, and it worked out really well for your customer, what would it mean to your company? That was my question. And he said it would mean that we would get the project done well, we would be seen in the community as a great contributor, and we would return the kind of revenue that our stakeholders and shareholders want. I said, great. Can I ask you a personal question? Because at the end of the day, companies don't sell the companies, people sell the people, like you said, Matt. I said, hey, if this project's successful, what would it mean to you? And this is what happened. He looked across the table. I'll never forget this moment. He looked across the table, emotion filled his face, and he said, I get to keep my job because the last project didn't go so well. See, I want to remind you, if you're a salesperson, you're not always selling for the reasons you think you are. Sometimes there's something totally different going on. Sometimes there isn't, but sometimes there is. And when we forget that, we go and we pitch people with the benefits we believe are important or the benefits that our company has told us are important, but they may or may not be the real reasons why our customers want to buy from us. and great sales professional, not to manipulate people and to shove shit down people's throat they don't need, but to get people the kind of thing they do need, understand the real reasons they're doing business. And that is the secret of, in my opinion, being a phenomenal sales professional who is understanding the mutual profitability of great business relationships. That's what I want to say on this topic. Chris, what do you want to say to our listeners as you think about this, as you look at it from your perspective?
Well, I think just to your point there that you said, like, I think that's why it's so important that we actually, as salespeople, we actually believe in the stuff in the company that we're working with, because when we get down to understanding, you know, how we can actually help people, we need to believe truly that, you know, what we're offering can help people. And I think that's a very important thing, is, you know, going back to the story you just told, like, you know, if we really didn't believe that our product could help save somebody's job, like, and we still went along and sold to them, we really have to think very hard about our integrity and who we are as from a character standpoint. So I think really believing in what we offer and that we actually do bring benefit is a very important aspect of it as well.
Awesome. And Matt, again, thanks for joining us today. I want to give you the last word. And so as you think about this topic, and if you were going to encourage people who are out there who are not on your team today, but if you were their vice president of sales and you were giving them your best advice right now on this topic of benefits and understanding real benefits and what it really means to our customer, and I'll go back to what you said in that email as to wrap up where we started. This is what you said: I don't think I've ever been successful at getting a customer to engage because it matters to me. That is not how it works. What would your best advice for people be if they want to become better at understanding this idea we're talking about today?
Yeah, thanks again, guys, for having me. I mean, this has been a blast. It's always nice catching up with friends, kind of connecting to what Chris said, and I love how much we're all on the same page. Launching from believing in what you do and believing in your product. Be sincere. Actually, a guy we know, in jest, he says, "Be sincere whether you mean it or not." Be sincere. I think that from a very, very young age, we're conditioned to be able to detect fraudulent people. And I think we never lose that. And so if I had to say one thing in the vein of uncommodifying ourselves, be sincere, be genuine, and if you can't be those things in your current role, it's time for a change. Time to look for something else.
That's a great, you know what, Matt, thanks. That's great advice, and that's a great challenge, because, listen, at the end of the day, if you sincerely cannot help your customer reach their goals, you are not a great partner for them. That is what I hear in this conversation. And if you can't sincerely engage with them, sell them what works for you and what's beneficial to you and to them, then there is a problem in that. And it's probably, at the end of the day, a transaction which will never be repeated. But if we want to create sustainable relationships of value and mutual profitability with our customers, and that is really what this Unpeddling series is all about for me, is how do we create mutually profitable, beneficial, relational partnerships with our customers that hold true value for us and for them, that are sustainable and they're enjoyable and they're worth the investment. Then that is what it's about at the end of the day. And so listen, thanks for joining us on this podcast. Listen, do me a favor. As you think about the things that we talked about today, email me at tim@theuncommodified.com or connect with me on social media, and let Matt and let Chris and let I know how you're unpacking and unpeddling yourself as a sales and marketing professional as you explore these ideas in your everyday world. Thanks for your time and have a great day.